Good day and welcome to the ninth episode of the ASEAN in Practice podcast series. I'm your host, Dennis Hu, Senior Research Fellow at the Center on Asia and Globalization, Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. In today's episode, we turn our attention to the Mekong River Basin and the work of the Mekong River Commission, or MRC for short, a unique regional institution that plays a central role in managing one of Asia's most important transboundary rivers. We are delighted to have with us Dr Anoulak Kittikhoun, former Chief Executive Officer of the MRC and currently a visiting Senior Fellow at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Dr Anoulak is the author of Small Countries, Big Diplomacy, Laos in the UN, ASEAN and MRC, and River Basin Organizations in Water Diplomacy, and has published numerous peer-reviewed articles, one of which received the Reinhard Bendix Best Paper Award from the American Sociological Association. Prior to his time at the MRC, Dr. Anoulak served at the United Nations headquarters and the Ralph Bunche Institute for International Studies and the Lao government. He has lectured widely and participated in international forums across the globe. He holds a bachelor's degree from the Australian National University and a master's and PhD from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Dr. Anoulak, welcome to the show. You recently completed your term as CEO of the Mekong River Commission. Could you briefly explain the MRC's mandate and how it differs from other regional organizations such as ASEAN?
Thank you very much, Dennis, for having me in the podcast. So it's nice to join you. So the Mekong Cooperation goes back a long time, into the 1950s, in fact. At that time, we have the Mekong Committee, which was under the UN framework. And the mandate was to develop the river for socio-economic prosperity. Now, fast forward to 1995, which was when the Mekong River Commission was born. It assumes some of that mandate, but also adds to it in terms of more sustainable development mandate. But the task is basically to promote and coordinate the water and the related resources of the Mekong River. And it's 6 countries, Mekong River, from China to Myanmar, and then Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And as you know, water is cross-cutting. So when it says coordinate water and related resources, it really means also you have to deal with water, food, energy, environment, people. And because the Mekong is also located in a very geostrategic region of the world, being Southeast Asia, it also have added dimensions of geopolitics and diplomacy. So the Commission works through coordinating, facilitating, and using technical data guidance, but also does some diplomatic works because you have 6 countries sharing the river. Each country have their own plans and projects, so you have to manage all of this. It's not a large organization, but it's an important organization taking care of the largest river in Southeast Asia and one of the great rivers of the world. And like ASEAN, it is an intergovernmental organization, so it works by consensus. It has 4 countries as members. But unlike ASEAN, which has everything under the sun for the region, the Mekong has more specific that it does.
So the Commission has been around for some time, established in 1995 in Vientiane, am I correct?
Right now, the headquarters is in Vientiane. We have a flood and drought management center in Phnom Penh. In the past, the headquarters used to be rotating around the member countries' cities, but now it has been decided that the headquarters is in Vientiane and the flood center in Phnom Penh, but very tied to all the 4 capitals of the Mekong countries.
Okay. So what do you consider some of the Commission's most significant achievements, but also its enduring challenges?
Yes, well, the Commission has been in existence for 30 years, but of course it built on cooperation much longer. I would say that, during the past 10, 15 years, I would name maybe 4 big achievements of the Commission. There's lots of challenges and difficulties, which I can get into in following. I think the Mekong is very complex. It's one of the biggest rivers in the world, situated in a complex environment, as I said. So the achievements, I think, first of all, is to really have a transboundary region governance frameworks that works. And this governance framework consists of the agreement, consists of the procedures on how to use waters across countries, and consists of guidelines on terms of building sustainable projects. So that's, I think, a very key part. And the second achievement, I think, is to build up a very robust knowledge base for the region, for the Mekong. And knowledge base is very important because, in contested space, people have different views, interests, opinions. So you need a neutral, impartial knowledge base to be able to dialogue, to be able to negotiate, to be able to talk to each other sensibly and not based on feelings. You have to do it with facts. So we have that knowledge base, we have tools, we have models, we have decision support system in place, which I think are quite strong. It can always be improved, but quite strong. And third, I think the Commission made very specific contribution to sustainable development of the Mekong River Basin. There are dams, for example, that have been proposed and they've been built, and many of them have gone through the Commission's procedures, guidelines, consultation, and came out much better than previously they were not, right? And also in terms of dealing with the environment, conserving fisheries, conserving wetlands, conserving floodplains. So there are works that the Commission does that improve the state of being. Without the Commission, I think these natural environment would have been lost. And finally, I think a very key contribution, which I think is not recognized enough, is in a very complex transboundary international rivers like this, where the riparians have different interests, but also where external actors have exerted influence. I think the Commission's work in terms of managing the relations between the different countries and also colored by interventions from without need to be appreciated. For example, there are projects that are proposed by one country where the other countries oppose and wanted to even take that country to international court, but through dialogue, through facilitation by the Commission and by the Secretariat, I think those projects have been managed, keeping the countries together, not having them in open conflicts, and I think that has to be recognized.
Okay, so you've mentioned that quite a lot of achievements. That's certainly the Commission has achieved a lot. What do you think are some of those challenges that the Commission still face?
Because the Mekong is very big, and change is happening very rapidly and fundamentally. I think the Commission has sometimes have been reactive to changes and not have been proactive enough. For example, with dam buildings, for example, they came at a very fast pace, and the Commission, although have achieved some success in some projects in terms of making them more sustainable, making them more transparent, but there are other projects that flew under the radar, right, and have been implemented without enough environmental measures, transparency, and these projects, they have impacts on the river, they have impacts on the people, they have impacts in terms of relations among states, right? So I think that's one. And second, maybe although the Commission have rules and procedures in place, they are soft rules, right? So they're sometimes up for interpretation. So there's, I think, fair criticism in terms of some countries may not have follow enough in terms of sharing information, for example, in terms of consultation with your neighbors, in terms of project assessment. But I think in the end, even for these kind of projects, the Commission will be engaged sooner or later.
Well, that leads to my next question, which is related to your last point. In one of the articles that you wrote, you mentioned that the MRC lacks enforcement powers, functioning instead as a platform for water diplomacy. In that context, how does the Commission encourage compliance with agreements? You mentioned a lot of them are basically soft laws, such as the 1995 Mekong Agreement, which allowed the establishment of the Commission.
Yes, that article, maybe somebody misunderstood me. It becomes infamous that the MRC may not care enough about states following rules, etc. But what I meant was really that the MRC was not created to regulate countries, and therefore, if we take that role, it would hurt more than help. If we take a sort of policeman role, but in the absence of that authority, there's still a lot you can do. And I think to be effective, You have to rely on what you're mandated to do, and you are given resources to do. So first, I talk about these procedures, guidelines, framework for cooperation. I think you have to make the most use of it. There's soft laws, but it doesn't mean that the countries don't follow. I think for the most part they have followed. It's just that do they follow enough or to what extent, right? So you need to encourage them to follow as much as possible. And you have to convince them that following the procedures, for example, sharing data, consult with your neighbors, allow joint monitoring, also benefits the projects, also benefit the countries in terms of you get a better project, you get a better support, you get a better reputation, right? So I think there's a lot of convincing that has been done. And second, because these procedures, they've been approved by the countries. And, some procedures and even guidelines take years. There's one that took 18 years. It's called the transboundary EIA guidelines. And the Mekong is actually the first river basin in the developing world that approved such guidelines, after 18 years of debate. But once they're approved, then the countries, have, obligation to follow them. So they do. And I think our technical work, I call it technical leadership, is really important because we are the repository of knowledge, data, models, tools. So even if the country, say, may be lacking here and there in terms of following procedures, we can still do the technical work. We can assess projects, we can make recommendations, we can follow up in terms of what really needs to be done for this project to whether they're dams, whether they're big canals, whether they're dredging for navigation, right? So we can really provide good technical advice, objective, independent advice, right? But not independent in the sense that we force them to accept, but independent in the sense that we have no interest, economic interest in terms of providing them, so they can do that. And finally, we appeal to what we call the Mekong spirit, which is that it's a culture of sort of understanding, mutual understanding, and compromise. So if Laos wants to do this, does Vietnam understand? If Cambodia wants to do this, does Vietnam or Thailand understands? So we have a lot of moments like that where, okay, initially there's some maybe oppositions, but in the end you appeal to the Mekong spirit, which is okay, no matter difficult it is, you still try to work together. Maybe you don't get the best outcome, but you get the next best outcome. And I think for the most part we have succeeded. There are some moments of difficulties, but I think in the end it works.
Sounds very similar to the ASEAN spirit, right? We do the best we can. But also very similar to ASEAN is that they also lack this enforcement power to ensure that their members comply. And I think in some of the previous podcasts that I held, some of the recommendations is that need to strengthen monitoring and evaluation. I'm assuming that's also part of the technical work that the Commission does?
That's right. Monitoring evaluation is very important. It's not just simply you have a plan and you have some indicators and you need to track, right? I think the MRC is quite strong on this, and unlike, I think, other intergovernmental organizations, including ASEAN, but ASEAN is a different beast. But for MRC, it's really a clear set of indicators and mechanism, and it's also integrated monitoring, right? We track both in terms of the reporting that we receive from projects or from countries, but also it's a very collaborative monitoring and tracking. Did you really achieve that? And I think having people to work on that, to spend resources on that, I think matters.
So let's talk a little bit about geopolitics as well as institutions as well. I mean, how does the Commission navigate different and competing interests among its members, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam? How do you do that?
Well, it's an intergovernmental organization, right? So within the framework of intergovernmental organization, usually it's by consensus that you have to make decisions. But consensus does not mean if you don't agree, you're paralyzed, right? Yeah, there are ways to move ahead without getting full consensus right away. So I think first of all, you need to really, people who work for the MRC or Mekong Corporation have to really understand the interests and positions of the countries involved. So you have six countries, one major power, superpower upstream, China, not member of the Commission, but a dialogue partner who use the river mostly for energy. So they have several dams upstream. And then next you have two important countries, major countries in the region, Thailand and Vietnam, who their parts of their basin have developed earlier than Laos and Cambodia, right? So Thailand developed their northeast mostly for agriculture, also for hydropower, and then Vietnam in the delta, usually for large rivers, the delta developed first, right? The Nile, Mississippi, Murray Darling, etc. Delta developed first, so Vietnam developed the delta to great benefits, but to great harm. And then you have Laos and Cambodia, which are the late developers, and they're sort of in the middle, right? In the middle. So whatever they do impact Vietnam and Cambodia, and whatever Cambodia does impact Vietnam. But you have also to also understand, and this is the discussions in the Mekong, right? Okay, so Vietnam, Thailand, you develop first, but you cannot stop the late developing countries from developing. We're in the ASEAN community, we're using the Mekong spirit, right? So there's this implicit understanding that, okay, Laos and Cambodia needs to develop, but how is the question. Also from that sort of perspective, then you try to apply your procedures, your guidelines, etc. So now I think the conversation for development in the Mekong has evolved in such a way that, for example, 15 years ago, when Laos, Cambodia wants to develop, there's this implicit drive not to approve their projects. But I think the Commission's work has said, okay, they need to develop because development needs to happen, but how? So now the conversation is much more nuanced. So let's have good projects. Let's have transparent projects. Let's have monitoring for these projects so that they don't make significant impacts. And this is how we move. So when a country wants to do big projects, even if all countries do not agree right away for the projects to go ahead or not, there's some other ways that we can sort of proceed. The Commission can throw up a study. Okay, let's study more. While at the same time the projects, we don't say the projects can go ahead. I mean, that's a sovereign decision of a country, right? But still, we study more, we put in place technical measures, we do the joint monitoring. So allow the cooperation to go ahead. But at the same time, you cannot stop. You don't have a consensus to stop a certain thing from happening.
Well, you worked for the MRC for many years. So let's think ahead. So what are your reflections on the future of the MRC and regional cooperation in the Mekong River Basin, including engagement with dialogue partners, like you mentioned, China, as well as major actors like the US?
Well, the Mekong is a big river, and it's largely a resilient river. It would not die tomorrow, right? But there's lots of challenges left, and I could name maybe three major challenges. One is the flow regime has changed. We used to have a very large wet season, for example, and a very dry season. But now, because of climate change and development of storage, so dams, this has changed. So now we have a more tame wet season and sort of a higher dry season. So this has opportunities and risks you can say that during the dry season we have more water for irrigation, for hydropower, etc. But also during the flood season, we also have risks, because some parts of the river, especially in the delta, they need flood, and including we have a big river called the Tonle Sap, which needs large amount of floods during the flood season in order to replenish the fish, the environment, and all these things. So challenges and risks. And second, because of development and climate change, now we have less sediments. So sediment is very crucial for rivers, especially the delta, because of nutrients, because of agriculture, because of riverbank stability. And the delta, that's 30 million people, and a key to Vietnam being the rice basket of the world, especially ASEAN. So it's very important, and this has dramatically reduced during the past 10, 20 years. So the Mekong, if you visit the Mekong, you see that it's brown. So we don't want the Mekong to be blue or green, right? So we don't want the Mekong to be the Danube. We want the Mekong to be brown, so full of sediments and full of nutrients. So this is a big, big challenge. And I think third is increasing or changing world order. And I think this affects every field of life, of relations in states. You have heightened geopolitical competitions. You have decreased trends in multilateral cooperation. You have more nationalistic types of policy making or posturing, even by countries who normally are champions of cooperation. So this your country first attitude, I think, is reverberating, and setting not so good examples for many countries. And I think this affects the Mekong and Mekong cooperation. But I think there are opportunities. First, we have a lot of infrastructure in the Mekong, dams, canals, etc. And we can coordinate them better. So if you coordinate them, you can also optimize them, not only for energy, but also for flood and drought mitigation. You can optimize them for irrigation. You can optimize them for navigation. So it benefits many sectors if you coordinate and collaborate. Second, and I think we need to learn from many parts of the world, where in international rivers they have joint development projects. For example, in the Colombia, US, and Canada, they have a series of joint projects that they invest and jointly work together. In the Senegal, they also have this. In the Parana River between Brazil and Paraguay, you have on the border, you have a big dam called Itaipu, where Brazilians and Paraguay experts work together daily to jointly manage. So I think joint development can really add more benefit to projects and also tie the countries together in terms of their fate, in terms of managing the river. And third, to manage, I think, really, external support, external intervention, external interest in the Mekong. I think we can strengthen ASEAN solidarity and centrality. I mean, there's always this hesitation somewhat, some Mekong countries about ASEAN sort of being in the Mekong, and also some hesitation from the rest of the ASEAN non-Mekong countries about involving directly in the Mekong. But I think this is a mistake, and of course, you have to do in such a way that you support the established institution, in this case, the Mekong River Commission. But I think Mekong affairs can be more centralized into the ASEAN agenda, be more supportive of what's happening in the Mekong, and I think this can mediate some influence from the outside.
Okay, that's a good point, because my next question is to look at the kind of institutional relationship between the Commission, the Mekong River Commission, and ASEAN. And you talked about how a lot of your work in the MRC could actually feed into the ASEAN agenda. Perhaps maybe you could elaborate a little bit about, for example, ASEAN has its own economic integration project, right? The ASEAN Economic Community. Are there any areas of work that the Commission is doing that can feed or support that economic integration agenda?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate in terms of Mekong ASEAN cooperation. You see, the Mekong can be the beating heart of ASEAN. I mean, not talk about the Mekong importance for the Mekong countries, the mainland countries of ASEAN, in terms of energy, food, tourism, and other types of connectivity. But it's also could be very important, especially in the future for the rest of ASEAN. In terms of energy, Laos wants to be the battery of ASEAN. Now it's half the battery of ASEAN, right? Only the mainland countries, but it sells also Singapore. Maybe in the future will be more, also to Malaysia maybe in the future. And like I said, Vietnam and Thailand, the top rice exporters in the world. And whether you're in Singapore or Malaysia or the Philippines, you eat Mekong rice, and etc. So I think ASEAN should pay more attention to this cooperation. I mean, there's sort of good work being done, but maybe the potential is not realized yet about the ASEAN power grid, for example. So that's, I think, recognizing Mekong's importance. But if you want the Mekong to remain productive in terms of food, fish, energy, and rice, and also to protect it for tourism, right? Because 30% of ASEAN tourism is in the Mekong. And you have to make sure that institutions like the MRC and people working on Mekong governance are supported. So ASEAN has an interest, I think, in terms of protecting the resource base so that it continues to be productive for years to come through efforts by both sides, starting with say the MOU between the ASEAN and MRC in 2018, and recently we have held ASEAN MRC Water Security Dialogue, and with non-Mekong countries like Indonesia becoming a partner of the MRC, and Singapore may follow soon, and others. I think it's on the right track in terms of this cooperation. But I think it's still somewhere to go, and it can be increased.
What about development partners? I know in ASEAN they do have sort of cooperation with development partners like the World Bank and ADB. What sort of development partners have been helping the MRCs?
So ASEAN call them dialogue partners. We call them development partners. The countries, in terms of Australia, Japan, Korea, US, the European countries, they have been supporting the MRC. The achievements that I talked about earlier, I think without development partners, I think much of that achievement would not be possible. But the member countries also increase the contribution to the MRC, and the development partners take a supportive role by member states. We also have World Bank, ADB, and others, multilateral institutions supporting, but I think less and less, and more specific on projects or etc., but not part of the core.
Well, I guess my last question is related to your career. You've worked in different international organizations. You've also worked in the United Nations. And I know you're interested in ASEAN's institutional development. So drawing on that experience, that extensive work experience that you have, what are your thoughts on how the ASEAN Secretariat can be strengthened?
Yeah, I worked for the UN for 10 years, a large global organization, and the MRC for 13 years in various positions, both at the technical level and also at leadership level. And I've dealt through these two organizations, but also as an official of a member state, in this case Laos. I've dealt with ASEAN for the past 20 years, and ASEAN, no doubt, is a very able and critical organization. But if you look at the UN, for example, it's a global organization. The Secretariat and plus the programs has some maybe 35,000 staff. And you look at the MRC, able, strong organization, but much more smaller mandate, has some 130 staff. And you look at ASEAN, which has a large mandate in Southeast Asia, but only has, say, 300 or 400 staff, and maybe less of that is only core staff, maybe 100 core staff, professional staff. So by numbers alone, you can say that maybe ASEAN Secretariat is a bit under-resourced and understaffed for the mandate of support member countries that it is given, right? Meanwhile, you have some 1,500 meetings a year of ASEAN. You have over 200 something bodies, mechanisms, working groups, and plus you also have to engage with the relevant meetings of non-ASEAN related bodies and mechanisms, maybe some 1,000 a year. So where is the time to think, to provide initiative, to provide ideas, to drive, to be proactive? So most of the work is, a lot of routine work, servicing meetings, writing documents, follow up. I mean, all of that are crucial, but you wonder, can the staff of the Secretariat be increased? But how to increase? Because the regular budget cannot easily be increased. So one of the things that maybe it can be considered is, in the MRC, for example, we have, this sort of yearly and 5-yearly strategic plan. And we make a budget for what is required to meet the strategic plan. And we know that the member country's success contribution can cover maybe 30-40%. So the rest have to come from somewhere. So for ASEAN, it can be considered, it can come from voluntary contributions. So for member states who can pay more, in addition to assess contribution, or development partners can put in some money to meet that level of what is required in terms of staffing, in terms of activities, what is required to have the secretariat be more strengthened. So that's one way you can consider. The other is not just the numbers, right? They say just the quality of the staff themselves. So you can possibly look at your recruitment and retention policy. In the UN and in the MRC, we don't have permanent contracts anymore. In the MRC, actually, we have only 6 years per position. And I know from anecdotal evidence in the ASEAN Secretariat that there are sort of senior positions, they've been there for a very long time. So where are the chance for sort of junior people or even fresh ideas to come in? It's not mean that they don't perform, but maybe some ideas they get you sort of get into, and this happens everywhere, not just ASEAN Secretariat. It happens in the UN. It happens somewhere else. You become sort of more comfortable, etc., etc. If you don't renew. I always believe that 5 years in a position is enough, especially for these kind of either governmental or intergovernmental organizations. And there are also ideas for how to increase collaboration among the different departments. Now we are a bit, I think, silo. Right? You have 3 pillars. How do you increase collaboration? How do you monitor effectively even when you don't have enforcement power? And finally, how do you exert technical leadership even when political decisions have to be made by states? I mean, there's no doubt. So there are some examples. Hopefully, I can suggest. I'm writing with a colleague for the ASEAN Bulletin, so stay tuned.
Well, ASEAN just launched its new vision, ASEAN Vision 2045. It's got new strategic plans for its 3 pillars, including the ASEAN Economic Community. So I think ASEAN itself needs to find ways to increase its capacity, whether in terms of financial resources or manpower, to be able to meet those targets, that new vision. So we have to wait and see what happens. Thank you so much, Dr. Anoulak, for joining us today and sharing your insights. We gain a deeper understanding of the MRC and the Mekong River Basin, its challenges and its contributions to regional cooperation and to ASEAN's strategic goals.